Ever wonder why some resource-rich nations absolutely skyrocket to develop status, while others just seem stuck in an endless loop of policy pivots? Welcome to another Explanaire. Today we're going to unpack Nigeria's incredibly complex journey toward industrialization. We'll be breaking down the strategy, the implementation, and the ultimate outcome of their historic efforts, and we're going to see exactly how those moves stack up against global heavyweights along the way.
Before we really get into the weeds, let's quickly define what we're actually talking about here. Industrialization isn't just about building a few factories. It's that massive structural leap from an agricultural economy reliant on manual labor straight into a mechanized system of mass production. It's the engine that stimulates growth across literally every sector of an economy. It is the ultimate goal.
So, to understand Nigeria's path, we're going to travel through three distinct eras of economic policy: import substitution, indigenization, and structural adjustment. And for each of these, we'll draw direct comparisons to the USA, Russia, and the Asian tigers to figure out what really works on the global stage.
All right, let's kick things off with attempt number 1, import substitution.
The logic here is pretty straightforward, right? Stop buying stuff from abroad and just start making it at home. Post-colonial Nigeria wanted to completely flip the script and extricate itself from economic backwardness. The goal was to start by making final goods locally, then eventually work their way up to producing intermediate and capital goods.
So let's view this through a strategy, implementation, and outcome lens. The strategy was local production. To implement this, the government threw up a complex system of tariffs to protect their fragile new infant industries. But look at the outcome. It's deeply ironic. Despite all those protective tariffs, Nigeria ended up relying heavily on imported raw materials, imported machinery, imported technology, and even foreign personnel just to keep those local industries running.
Let's zoom out for a second and compare this to the United States. While Nigeria's attempt to look inward actually forced them to rely more on external inputs, the USA utilized a massive, sprawling range of their own local agricultural and mineral resources to feed their industrial engine.
How did the U.S. pull it off? Well, they combined huge local resources like petroleum and massive hydroelectric power with highly skilled immigrant labor. They also went all in on infrastructure. By extending water transport through the St. Lawrence Seaway, they locked in incredibly cheap transport. Plus, instead of just shielding their local markets, the U.S. actively promoted exports, generating huge capital from international trade. So, with the first attempt backfiring and creating more foreign dependence, the Nigerian government had to ask themselves, how do we take back control?
That brings us right into attempt 2, the push for indigenization in the 1970s.
The thinking shifted. If you can't naturally build the capacity to replace foreign imports, well, you legally mandate that locals own the businesses. Driven by the Enterprise Promotion Decree of 1972, this was a strict legal framework designed to essentially nationalize the economy and force greater local participation.
Back to our strategy implementation outcome playbook. The strategy was to literally classify businesses and reserve specific sectors, like rice milling or printing, strictly for Nigerians. Implementation meant legally raising indigenous equity up to 60% by 1977. But the outcome here is crucial. This wasn't real industrialization. It was basically a move by the military government to control ownership. Because they didn't do the hard work of expanding actual manufacturing skills, the policy failed and ended up alienating the exact foreign capital they still desperately needed.
Let's contrast that top-down approach with Russia. Russia actually successfully localized its industry, but they did it by relying on a deeply trained domestic workforce rather than just signing legal decrees. Nigeria tried to force ownership from the top without the grassroots skills to back it up.
Russia totally backed up their self-sufficiency policies with heavy human capital. Yes, they had vast minerals like iron and diamonds, but the real game changer was training absolute armies of electrical, mechanical, and chemical engineers. And surprisingly, unlike Nigeria's policy, which pushed money away, Russia strategically attracted foreign investors from Europe and the US to build up their industrial base while keeping ultimate control.
Fast forward to the early 1980s. A crushing debt crisis hits, and those old protectionist policies, they had to be totally scrapped. The pressure was on to make a radical pivot.
Enter attempt 3, the Structural Adjustment Program.
This was a massive IMF-backed pivot away from state control, opening the borders wide to free market capitalism. Under the Babangida administration, the focus shifted entirely to deregulation, privatization, and commercialization.
Looking at the strategy, the goal was clear: trade reform and export-led growth. The implementation relied heavily on setting up a foreign exchange market to find a realistic value for the naira, which had been artificially propped up for years. But the outcome? It proved incredibly painful. Relying purely on market forces without a strong domestic manufacturing base already in place is like jumping out of a plane while you're still sewing the parachute. You just can't successfully deregulate an industrial sector that hasn't fully matured.
Let's put this rapid, forced deregulation next to the Asian tigers. These nations absolutely embraced free markets and exports. But, unlike Nigeria under the Structural Adjustment Program, the Asian tigers maintained intense, strategic state guidance over their economies. Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, they pulled off an absolute economic miracle, growing at about 6% a year. How? By establishing what's called a capitalist developmental state. Their governments fiercely protected and subsidized local industries until they were strong enough to fight on the global stage. They pushed vital land reforms and, most importantly, poured massive investment into human resources. They didn't just open the floodgates, they strategically prepared their workforce to swim in those waters.
All right, let's bring this all together. What are the big takeaways from the global stage? If we look chronologically at Nigeria's three big swings, we see a really clear pattern. The implementation consistently falls short of the strategy. In the 60s, trying to produce locally still required importing everything else. In the 70s, handing over ownership failed because the technical skills just weren't there yet. And in the 80s, opening up to a free market was brutal because a diversified manufacturing base simply didn't exist to compete globally.
At the end of the day, the stark difference between Nigeria and places like the USA, Russia, and the Asian tigers comes down to one crucial thing: true economic diversification. While those global giants diversified their economies and heavily trained their human capital, Nigeria remained overly tethered to a single product: fossil fuels. A lack of diversification leaves any country completely vulnerable. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. Is a nation's true engine what's buried in the ground, or is it how effectively they build the people and the policies to refine it? As we've seen today, you need a lot more than decrees and deregulation. You need real skills, strategic protection, and a genuinely diversified base. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the world around you is actually built.